Karen Winters stood in her pristine front yard at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday, wearing pressed khaki capras and a pastel cardigan despite the summer heat. The measuring tape in her hand extended across her neighbor James Mitchell's property line, its yellow tongue stretching across his freshly planted garden bed. Her lips pursed into a thin line as she scribbled furiously in a leather-bound notebook. "Excuse me? What are you doing on my property?" James appeared in his driveway, coffee mug in hand, eyebrows raised in bewilderment. Karen didn't startle. Instead, she straightened her posture, flipped her highlighted bob, and gestured to the garden bed with manicured precision. "This," she declared, "is 3 inches over the property line according to the HOA Covenant, Section 12, Paragraph 4. She thrust the measuring tape toward James. "See for yourself." James stared at her, coffee forgotten. "I've lived here for 15 years. That garden bed hasn't moved." "Well, I'm the new HOA president," Karen announced, her voice carrying across the quiet cul-de-sac. "And things are going to be done properly now." What James didn't know, what none of the Sycamore Heights residents yet realized, was that Karen had bigger plans than enforcing minor infractions. She'd moved to the neighborhood 6 months ago and had methodically worked her way onto the HOA board, then to presidency. Her predecessor had resigned after Karen had discovered his fence was 2 inches taller than regulations permitted. Karen glanced at the corner of James' property where it connected with her backyard. The small triangular section, obscured by mature oak trees, was actually the reason she'd chosen this house. According to her careful examination of the original neighborhood plats, there was an error in the boundary survey when the homes were built 30 years ago. "I'll expect this fixed by Monday," Karen said, retracting her measuring tape with a sharp snap, "or there will be fines." As she walked away, Karen's mind was already calculating. If she could get James to move the garden bed, it would establish precedent. Then she could address the property line discrepancy that would add nearly 800 square feet to her own backyard, land that currently belonged to James and 3 other neighbors. Back in her home office, Karen updated her spreadsheet. She'd already issued 17 citations in her first week as president. The neighbors called her HOA Karen behind her back. She'd seen the neighborhood Facebook group, but she didn't care. Rules existed for a reason. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter, Melissa. "Mom, please stop harassing the neighbors." Karen ignored it. Melissa was 28 and didn't understand the importance of property values, or that Karen was playing a long game. After her divorce last year, she realized no one was looking out for her interests. She had to do it herself. She glanced at the framed photo on her desk, herself 15 years younger, with her ex-husband and daughter in front of their old house. The house he kept in the divorce because his name alone was on the deed. She'd never make that mistake again. Karen opened her color-coded folder labeled Property Expansion Project and reviewed her notes. According to her research, the error in the original survey meant she could potentially claim adverse possession after establishing dominion over the disputed land. All she needed was to start the process by challenging the current boundaries. She smiled as she looked out her window at James, who was now measuring his garden bed with his own tape, his face flushed with anger. Phase 1 was underway. The monthly HOA meeting in the Sycamore Heights Community Center buzzed with an unusual number of attendees. Word had spread about HOA Karen and her citation spree. Karen arrived precisely 7 minutes early, pleased to see the turnout. More witnesses meant more official recognition of her authority. "Let's call this meeting to order," Karen announced, striking her gavel with unnecessary force. First order of business: violation notices. For the next 20 minutes, she methodically listed each violation by address, ignoring the growing murmurs of discontent. When she reached the end of her list, she smiled thinly. "Any questions?" Eleanor Williams, a retired judge who'd lived in the neighborhood since it was built, raised her hand. "Yes, Karen. I'm curious about your authority to issue these citations without board approval." Karen's smile didn't waver. "As president, I'm empowered to enforce existing covenants." "Actually," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the weight of her judicial experience, "according to our bylaws, enforcement requires a majority vote of the board for each action." A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Karen hadn't anticipated this challenge, especially not from someone with legal expertise. She counted on the residents' general ignorance of HOA regulations. "I have copies of the bylaws here," Eleanor continued, distributing papers to the board members. "You'll note Section 5 clearly outlines the procedure." Karen felt heat rising in her neck but maintained her composure. "We'll take that under advisement. Moving on to new business. I move that all citations issued in the past month be suspended pending proper board review," said Eleanor, cutting Karen off. "I second," called James Mitchell from the back row. Karen's fingers tightened around her gavel. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. She planned to introduce her proposal for a property line audit of the entire neighborhood, the next phase of her plan. "That's not on the agenda," Karen said firmly. "Point of order," said Eleanor. Bylaw challenges always take precedence. The vote was quick and decisive. All board members except Karen voted to suspend the citations. Karen forced herself to remain seated while her authority was undermined. These people didn't understand what they were doing. Without strict enforcement, property values would plummet. Their investments would suffer. After the meeting, Karen sat alone in the community center, reviewing her notes. She underestimated Eleanor Williams, but this was merely a setback. Karen hadn't built a successful 20-year career in corporate compliance by giving up at the first obstacle. Her phone buzzed with another text from Melissa. "Mom, the neighbors are talking about starting a petition to remove you from the board. Please stop this." Karen typed back, "They don't understand what I'm trying to accomplish." The truth was more complicated. Since her divorce, Karen had felt her life spiraling out of control. The HOA presidency was the first time she felt powerful again. And the property expansion plan wasn't just about square footage. It was about taking back what she felt the world owed her. She gathered her papers and noticed James and Eleanor speaking in hushed tones near the parking lot. They glanced her way, then quickly looked away. Karen straightened her shoulders. If they wanted a war, she would give them one. And she knew exactly where to start. Dawn broke over Sycamore Heights as the rumble of heavy machinery shattered the weekend quiet. Karen Winters stood supervising as workers unloaded lumber and concrete from a truck parked in her driveway. "Ma'am, can you confirm the property line again?" asked the foreman, consulting a map. Karen pointed confidently to the stakes she placed the previous evening, extending her property line 8 feet into what her neighbors believed was their land. "Follow the markers exactly." By 8:30 a.m., the unmistakable sound of post-hole diggers brought neighbors out of their homes. James Mitchell was the first to approach, coffee mug again in hand, this time accompanied by Eleanor Williams. "What the hell is this?" James demanded, pointing to a stake driven into what had been his yard for 15 years. Karen smiled pleasantly. "I'm installing a privacy fence on my property line." "This is not your property line," Eleanor said firmly. "Actually, it is." Karen pulled out a document from her portfolio. "I've had a new survey conducted. There was an error in the original neighborhood plat from 30 years ago." She handed them a professional-looking survey with an official stamp. What she didn't mention was that the surveyor was her brother-in-law who owed her a favor, and that the official documentation hadn't been filed with the county. "This can't be right," James sputtered, looking at the paper. "Construction can't proceed without HOA approval for a new fence," Eleanor pointed out. Karen's smile widened. "Check your email. I called an emergency board meeting last night after everyone left. We had exactly quorum with the 3 members who stayed. The request was approved." This wasn't entirely true. Karen had convinced 2 newer board members to stay by claiming they needed to sign routine paperwork. They barely glanced at what they were approving. "This is completely inappropriate," Eleanor said, her judicial demeanor slipping. "Feel free to file a complaint," Karen replied. In the meantime, construction continues. As Eleanor and James stormed off to call an emergency neighborhood meeting, Karen felt a flutter of satisfaction. The fence would establish physical evidence of her claim to the disputed land, a crucial element for adverse possession. By noon, 4 concrete footings had been poured at the corners of what Karen now considered her expanded property. The fence would enclose portions of land previously understood to belong to James and 2 other neighbors. Karen's phone rang. It was her ex-husband, Richard. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Melissa called me in tears about some neighborhood feud you've started." "I'm protecting my investment," Karen replied coolly. "Something you might understand if you hadn't put only your name on our house deed." "That was 20 years ago, and we both signed the papers." Karen hung up. Richard didn't understand. Nobody did. When they divorced, she had to start over at 53, buying the smaller house with her portion of the settlement. If she could expand the property, its value would increase substantially. As the afternoon progressed, neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, watching the construction with growing concern. Karen pretended not to notice their whispers or glares. She'd never been popular even before the divorce. Richard had been the charming one, the neighborhood favorite, who'd hosted barbecues while she kept the books and enforced the rules. Now she was alone, but she had power. The foreigner approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, several people have told us we're building on their property. We can't be involved in a boundary dispute." "A survey is clear," Karen insisted, but she could see the workers exchanging glances. She knew she was losing this battle. "Fine. Leave the footings. I'll find another company to finish the job." As the construction crew packed up, Karen retreated inside, ignoring the neighbors still gathered outside. Her phone buzzed with messages from the HOA board demanding explanations, but she silenced it. Looking out her window at the concrete footings, markers of her thwarted expansion, Karen spent Sunday night in her home office surrounded by property records and legal documents. The construction fiasco had been a miscalculation, but she already formulated a new approach. If physical assertion wouldn't work, she'd try legal maneuvering. Her printer hummed as she carefully created what appeared to be historical documentation of the property boundaries. With her background in corporate compliance, Karen knew exactly how to make documents look official. The right letterhead, appropriate dates, convincing signatures. She wasn't technically forging anything, she told herself. She was simply recreating what should have existed if the original survey had been done correctly. At 2:30 a.m., she finally went to bed, satisfied with her work. By morning, she filed these discovered documents with the county recorder's office. Once in the public record, they would be difficult to challenge without an expensive legal battle, something her middle-class neighbors couldn't afford. Karen's alarm blared at 6:00 a.m. She dressed carefully in a conservative blazer and skirt, her authority outfit from her corporate days. The county recorder's office opened at 8:00 and she intended to be first in line. As she backed out of her driveway, Karen noticed James Mitchell standing near his mailbox, watching her. She gave him a small, smug wave. Let him wonder what she was up to. At the county building, Karen approached the clerk with confident familiarity. I need to file these historical property documents that were recently discovered during a home renovation, she explained, sliding the folder across the counter. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes, barely glanced at the papers. Fill out this form. Filing fee is $60. Karen completed the form with meticulous attention to detail, paid the fee, and received her receipt. Phase 2 complete. Now the documents were officially part of the public record. On her drive home, Karen allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The neighbors might have stopped her fence, but they couldn't fight county records without significant expense and effort. Her satisfaction evaporated when she turned onto her street. 3 police cars were parked in front of her house. Karen pulled into her driveway, maintaining her composure as she approached the officers, talking with Eleanor Williams and several other neighbors. Ms. Winters, one officer stepped forward. We'd like to ask you some questions about the property dispute and the concrete footings installed yesterday. Of course, officer, Karen replied smoothly. No, I don't see how this is a police matter. It becomes a police matter, Eleanor said, when someone alters survey stakes on registered property lines. That's a criminal offense in this state. Karen felt a cold wave of realization. She hadn't considered that the original survey markers might have been legally registered. I had a new survey done that showed. By your brother-in-law, James interrupted, who isn't licensed in this state. We checked. The officer looked at Karen. Ma'am, we're not making any arrests at this time, but we are documenting this incident. I'd advise you not to make any further alterations to the property boundaries pending resolution. As the police departed with statements from the neighbors, Karen retreated into her house, ignoring the triumphant looks from the gathering crowd. She hadn't anticipated this level of resistance or organization from her neighbors. Her phone rang, her daughter again. Mom, what's going on? Mrs. Abernathy called to tell me there are police at your house. Everything's fine, Melissa, Karen said automatically. Just a misunderstanding about property lines. This isn't like you, Melissa said. Dad says you've been different since the divorce, but this is extreme even for that. Karen ended the call, unsettled by her daughter's comment. Had she changed? She'd always been a stickler for rules, but never underhanded. The divorce had left her feeling powerless, and now she was grasping at control however she could find it. She looked out at the neighbors still congregated near her driveway. They used to be Richard's friends more than hers, but they'd never been enemies until now. Something had to change. But Karen wasn't ready to back down. By Wednesday morning, Karen had received official notice that the HOA board had called for her removal as president, citing abuse of power and misrepresentation of authority. The vote was scheduled for the following week. Rather than waiting for the inevitable, Karen decided to escalate. She spent $2,500 on a retainer with Prentice and Associates, a law firm specializing in property disputes. The amount represented most of her monthly pension, but she considered it an investment in her future. So you believe there's an error in the original neighborhood development plans? Attorney Prentice asked, reviewing her documents in his downtown office. Exactly, Karen confirmed. And I found historical documentation supporting my claim. She didn't mention she created these documents herself. Prentice frowned slightly. These records appear to conflict with the county's official plat. Where did you obtain them? They were in the previous homeowner's files, Karen lied smoothly. I discovered them during renovations. The attorney seemed skeptical but continued reviewing the papers. I'll need to conduct my own research before proceeding. Property boundary disputes can be complex and expensive. I understand, Karen replied, projecting confidence she didn't entirely feel. Her savings were limited, but the potential property gain would be worth it. That afternoon, Karen was served with a cease and desist letter from a lawyer representing James Mitchell and 4 other neighbors, demanding she remove the concrete footings and retract her fraudulent survey. Karen called Attorney Prentice immediately. They're threatening legal action. We need to respond aggressively. Ms. Winters, Prentice said cautiously, I started looking into the records, and there are inconsistencies in your documentation that concern me. The signatures on these historical documents appear anachronistic. What does that mean? Karen asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. She'd used modern ink on historical documents. It means I need to be certain of the authenticity of these records before proceeding. The firm cannot be associated with potentially fraudulent claims. Karen felt panic rising. They're not fraudulent. The boundaries are wrong. I can prove it. Then let's wait for my research to confirm that through legitimate channels, Prentice suggested. In the meantime, I advise removing those concrete footings as a show of good faith. Absolutely not, Karen snapped. That would be admitting defeat. After hanging up, Karen paced her living room, anger and anxiety churning inside her. Everything was unraveling. She'd been so certain she was right, that she deserved more than what she had. Her doorbell rang. Karen opened it to find Eleanor Williams standing there alone. "May I come in?" the retired judge asked. "I think we should talk." Karen hesitated, then stepped aside. She had nothing to lose at this point. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, declining Karen's automatic offer of tea. "I've been researching the original neighborhood development," she said without preamble. "And there was actually an error in the survey." Karen's head snapped up. "I knew it." "Not the error you've been claiming," Eleanor clarified. "The developer actually shorted each homeowner about 20 square feet due to a miscalculation in the cul-de-sac radius, including you." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that pursuing this will lead to a reassessment of all property lines in the neighborhood. And if your goal is to increase your property size, it will backfire. You'd actually lose square footage." Karen stared at Eleanor, searching for deception but finding none. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because this has gone far enough," Eleanor said firmly. "You've alienated every neighbor, you're facing removal from the HOA board, and now you're spending money on lawyers for a losing battle." Karen felt the foundation of her carefully constructed plan crumbling beneath her. If Eleanor was right, and Karen suspected she was, then all of this had been for nothing. "The vote to remove you is Monday," Eleanor continued, "but you can resign instead. Save some dignity." As Eleanor left, Karen remained at her kitchen table, surrounded by the wreckage of her schemes. For the first time since her divorce, she wondered if she'd lost perspective completely. Monday evening arrived with an unusual stillness over Sycamore Heights. The community center parking lot filled as neighbors arrived for the special HOA meeting, the one where Karen would be voted out as president. Karen sat in her car, watching people enter. She had spent the weekend in a state of agitated contemplation after attorney Prentice had called to terminate their relationship, citing ethical concerns about her documentation. Her carefully constructed plans had collapsed entirely. She had two choices: face public humiliation at the meeting or hide in her house. Neither appealed to her. Karen Winters had never been a coward even when she was wrong. Taking a deep breath, she exited her car and walked toward the community center. Conversations hushed as she entered. All eyes turned to her, some curious, others hostile. Karen held her head high as she took a seat in the front row. James Mitchell called the meeting to order from the president's position at the center table. First agenda item: the motion to remove Karen Winters as HOA president for violations of bylaws and abuse of authority. "Point of order," Karen said, standing. "I'd like to address the meeting before the vote." Murmurs rippled through the room. James looked uncertain and nodded reluctantly. Karen approached the podium, surveying the faces of neighbors she'd antagonized over the past months. "I've made mistakes," she began, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "Significant ones." The room fell silent in surprise. "After my divorce last year, I felt—" Karen paused, uncomfortable with this level of vulnerability. "I felt powerless. The HOA presidency gave me control again. Then I convinced myself I deserved more land, more authority, more respect." She placed her folder on the podium. "This contains my resignation from the board, effective immediately. It also includes a signed agreement to remove the concrete footings from the property line at my expense." Eleanor Williams watched her with an unreadable expression, while others looked suspicious of this sudden reversal. "I can't undo the damage to our neighborhood relationships," Karen continued, "but I can stop making it worse. The survey documents I presented were—" She swallowed hard. "They were altered. The property lines are exactly where they've always been." A collective gasp filled the room. Admitting to document forgery was potentially opening herself to legal consequences, but Karen felt a strange relief in finally telling the truth. "I don't expect forgiveness," she concluded, "but I am sorry." As Karen returned to her seat, the stunned silence gave way to whispers. James cleared his throat. "Well, given the resignation, we'll move to item 2, election of a new president." The meeting proceeded, with Karen sitting quietly through the election of James as interim president. She had expected to feel humiliated, but instead felt oddly unburdened. As the meeting adjourned, Karen prepared to face the gauntlet of neighbors on her way out. To her surprise, Eleanor fell into step beside her. That couldn't have been easy, the retired judge said quietly. It wasn't, Karen admitted. But it was necessary. What made you change your approach? Karen considered the question. My daughter. She said I'd change after the divorce, become someone she didn't recognize. I finally looked in the mirror and saw she was right. Eleanor nodded. The law has clear penalties for property disputes and document fraud, but neighborhoods operate on a different kind of justice. Meaning your public acknowledgement goes a long way. Not all the way, but it's a start. As they reached the parking lot, Karen noticed James Mitchell approaching. Her stomach tightened. The concrete removal company needs access tomorrow, he said stiffly. 9 a.m. work for you. Karen nodded, surprised by the businesslike tone rather than further recrimination. As she drove home, Karen realized that while she had lost the battle for additional property, she had perhaps preserved something more valuable, the possibility of eventually regaining her neighbor's civility, if not their trust. The concrete footings in her yard no longer represented potential expansion. They were monuments to her worst impulses. Tomorrow, they would be gone, and the slow work of rebuilding could begin. 3 months after the community center confrontation, Karen Winters sat on her back patio, nursing a cup of tea and reviewing her household budget. Her financial situation had tightened since paying for concrete removal and settling the legal fees from her brief engagement with attorney Prentice. A movement caught her eye. James Mitchell in his backyard installing a new sprinkler system. They hadn't spoken beyond curt nods since the meeting. Most neighbors maintained a similar distance, not hostile, but certainly not friendly. Karen's phone chimed with a text from Melissa. Landed safely. Still good for lunch tomorrow? Looking forward to it, Karen replied. Her relationship with her daughter had slowly improved since Karen's public admission and subsequent behavior change. The sound of someone clearing their throat made Karen look up. Eleanor Williams stood at the edge of her patio. You have a moment? Eleanor asked. Karen gestured to the empty chair across from her. Please. Eleanor sat, placing a file folder on the table between them. The HOA board has been discussing the original survey error I mentioned, the miscalculation in the cul-de-sac radius. Karen tensed. I kept my word. I haven't pursued any property claims. I know, Eleanor said. This isn't about your claims. It's about the developer's original mistake. We got an official survey conducted. She opened the folder, revealing a detailed property map of the entire neighborhood. Every homeowner lost approximately 20 square feet because of the error. The land essentially belongs to no one. It was never properly platted. Karen studied the map, professional interest overriding her personal history with the issue. So what happens now? The board voted last night. We're filing to have the land properly divided among all homeowners. Everyone will gain a small section along their back property lines. Karen looked up in surprise. Everyone, including me? Eleanor nodded. Including you. It's the legally correct solution. A small, ironic laugh escaped Karen. After all her schemes and manipulations, she would get additional property through legitimate means, far less than she tried to claim but obtained honestly. There's something else, Eleanor continued, watching Karen carefully. The board needs someone with experience in documentation and filing procedures to handle the paperwork with the county. James suggested you might be interested. Karen stared at her, stunned. Why would he suggest me? Why would anyone trust me after what I did? Because you understand the process better than anyone else in the neighborhood. And because people deserve second chances when they demonstrate genuine change. Eleanor shrugged. Also, frankly, no one else wants to deal with the bureaucratic headache. Karen found herself speechless, a rare occurrence. I don't know what to say. Say it'll help, but that you'll do it right this time, Eleanor replied. The position is unpaid and largely thankless, but it might help rebuild some bridges. After Eleanor left, Karen remained on her patio, considering the unexpected turn of events. The folder sat before her, a path to redemption of sorts, or at least a step away from pariah status. The irony wasn't lost on her. In her desperate grab for property and power, she'd lost the respect of her neighbors and nearly her relationship with her daughter. Now, by accepting a tedious administrative role that no one else wanted, she might begin to repair the damage. Karen picked up her phone and texted Melissa. Something interesting happened today. I'll tell you about it at lunch. Over the next week, Karen threw herself into the property adjustment project, meticulously preparing the documentation for the county. She worked from her home office, carefully avoiding any hint of the deception that had characterized her previous efforts. When the paperwork was complete, the HOA held a small gathering to sign the final documents. Karen arrived early, setting up the materials with professional precision. As neighbors filtered in, she noted the range of reactions, some still wary, others cautiously accepting of her new role. James approached as she organized the signature pages. Everything in order? He asked, his tone businesslike but not unfriendly. Karen nodded. Double-check each page. Everyone gains exactly 19.7 square feet. A hint of a smile touched his face, a far cry from the 800 you originally tried to claim. Karen felt her cheeks warm but met his gaze directly. The right way is better, even if the reward is smaller. Indeed. James considered her for a moment. The community garden committee has an opening. Once this project is complete, you might consider applying. Your organizational skills would be useful. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was an olive branch. A small one, but real. As the signing proceeded, Karen observed the community she'd nearly torn apart now coming together over a mutual benefit. The land adjustment was minor in terms of square footage, but significant in its proper execution. Later, walking home with her copy of the finalized documents, Karen reflected on the strange journey of the past year. She had lost and found herself in unexpected ways. The divorce had taken her identity, the HOA presidency had given her a false one, and now she was building something more authentic. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. County recorder scheduled for Tuesday. Need a ride? Karen smiled slightly as she typed her response. I'll drive, and I'll bring the documents, the real ones this time. The concrete footings had been removed months ago, but occasionally Karen still noticed the slight depressions in her lawn where they had been, reminders of how far she had strayed from her values and how long the journey back would be. Yet as she unlocked her front door, she felt something she hadn't experienced since before the divorce, a sense of belonging exactly where she was with exactly what she had.